Our next panel focuses on the state of the internet, significant trends and changes in year 2 of the pandemic. Joining me today is Kevon Swift, Head of Strategic Relations and Integration at LACNIC. Kevon engages regularly with international organizations, public sector actors, law enforcement, and other players involved in Caribbean internet development. Our second panelist is Bevil Wooding, the Director of Caribbean Affairs for the American Registry for Internet Numbers, ARIN. He is responsible for managing ARIN's relationships with its technical, regulatory, private, and public sector stakeholders in the region. Also contributing to our discussion today is Albert Daniels. As the ICANN Senior Manager for Stakeholder Engagement for the Caribbean, Albert leads engagement in 32 Caribbean territories and leads specialized projects in the ICANN Latin American and Caribbean Regional Strategy. Albert's responsibilities include developing and executing the organization's strategic and tactical objectives in the Caribbean region. And rounding off our panel is Sherman Osepa, SIDS, Small Island Development States, Digital Development, Natural Disaster Mitigation Strategies, Cybersecurity areas of interest. Gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you tremendously, Liesel, and thank you to the organizers of CANTO and all of you, the participants, for being here as we come to the final sessions here in this very successful virtual CANTO 36 event. By way of short introduction, the Latin American and Caribbean Internet Addresses Registry manages, distributes, and registers numbering resources, namely IPs and ASNs, across 33 economies. I'll give a general panorama of the state of the internet, with this being the second year of the pandemic, with a caveat about what the internet is and what it isn't. The internet is the largest global computer network of our time, facilitating a variety of socioeconomic activities, both old and new, through a suite of standardized communications protocols. So it's a medium, activities that happen via the medium, both good and bad, are often attributed to it, but there is a distinction. And at the end of the day, what I'm here to tell you today is that the internet is still going very strong. It goes without saying that the pandemic triggered a ripple effect across the internet ecosystem, and more specifically, the internet value chain. We can easily talk about the impact of the pandemic on the submarine cable industry, network operations, international connectivity, and wholesale pricing. A popular example among content applications would be that Netflix reported in 2020 the deployment of optimization techniques to reduce unnecessary traffic by 25%. And according to Telegeography, for bandwidth growth within Latin America, there's a 5% implied COVID-19 acceleration effect. I'll talk briefly about initial impacts when the pandemic was announced and lockdown measures were being put into place. The uptake in network traffic meant that various types of online service providers had to manage traffic differently and suddenly to avoid congestion. And they may have heard about reduced bit rate for streaming video platforms, accelerated scheduled plans for capacity upgrades, and ongoing network maintenance and repairs. Among companies, we would have seen a hodgepodge of planned but accelerated digital transformation initiatives, along with last-minute pivoting strategies. On the consumer's end, they have been subjected to teleworking in various forms and in keeping up with productivity. The crisis certainly provided opportunities, boosted innovation with examples afar of companies adopting drone technology to optimize delivery of physical goods. Now, in terms of number resources distributed and managed by LACNIC, we found that in a recent study conducted by a company called SMC Plus, the demand for such resources continued to grow organically, even throughout the entire pandemic, as opposed to a particular phenomenon that could affect number resource requests. It's worth noting that LACNIC entered its true exhaustion in last year, August. And by true exhaustion, I meant that there were no longer any IPv4 resources available. What is available right now is only through a waiting list on returned and quarantine resources or the secondary free market. This study also highlighted that compared to 5 years ago, technical knowledge regarding IPv6 had become more massified and the secondary market for IPv4 had matured, to the extent that prices per IPv4 have stabilized significantly and are now settled between 28 to 30 US per IP. What could account for this stability is the greater availability to trade and transfer IPs across 4 out of the 5 RIR regions, every region except Africa, so that we have a less dynamic IPv4 demand. And obviously, as IPv6 takes flight, people reconfigure their network addressing plans, and techniques to have both protocols are being put into place. So there are still some small results of IPv4 coming back to the registry, affecting that scarcity value and therefore price. In addition to the French Caribbean, there have been significant IPv6 deployment rates in 2 notable territories I'd like to mention. In Puerto Rico, they had a deployment rate of 35%, and by that I mean they have IPv6 available right up to the end user. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago at around 24%, which had been one of the leading IPv6 economies in the world for quite a number of years. So I'm going to wrap up soon because I'm very cognizant of the time that we have here. My interpretation of all of this is that despite, well, digital transformation and digital divide initiatives remain as 2 separate parts within a dichotomy because the drive for IPv6 seems to still be anchored in what we will see as the previously identified endeavors such as wearable technologies, gaming, the Internet of Things deployments, and that can cover everything from smart cities to the Internet of Everything. The consolidation of the IPv4 secondary market means that traditional behaviors and practices that could have affected demand have been maintained, and we continue to operate in an IPv4 world with steadily increasing experiences of dual stacking, meaning running both IPv4 and IPv6. And somewhere in the world among the internet 60,000 plus networks, there's a small nucleus of networks that are IPv6 only, and that is expected to increase as time goes by. So with our number resources exhausting in August of last year, in terms of the behavior, there was a slight peak that happened up until that point, and then immediately afterwards, the entire demand for number resources went very, very low. The IPv6 only resources that one would have expected haven't really taken off ground at this very time. So I'll stick a flag there, and I'll be happy to come back later on with a bit more information on what's been happening in the numbers community during the pandemic. Over to you, Lisa.
Okay, perfect, Kevon. Thank you very much for starting our discussion today. I'm going to hand over to Bevil so that you can share with us your contribution to this topic.
No problem.
There you go.
So thank you, and thank you to CANTO as well, and congratulations on what has been another successful CANTO annual event. Very, very well done so far. I want to continue where Kevon left off in terms of what is happening in the space and how the regional internet registries are observing these developments. I am the director for Caribbean Affairs at ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Like LACNIC, it's a non-profit member-based organization. The ARIN service region covers North America, that is Canada and the United States, as well as parts of the Caribbean, both English and French-speaking territories, actually. And our observations in terms of the impact of COVID are quite similar to what our colleagues at LACNIC have observed in terms of number resource allocations. The use of IP number resources, your V4 and V6, have really continued much along the same pace as they have had before. Of more interest to us, and I think of greater interest to this conversation, is how the pandemic has been driving general internet usage trends, both at the national and regional level. And I want to spend a bit of my time talking about that. And I think we'd have all witnessed firsthand the acceleration of government services online, of businesses being forced to find ways to continue their services and their service delivery using the internet and internet-based tools. More consumers, whether for school, whether for work, whether for banking, whether for recreation, have also found themselves trying out, sampling, or actually having to adopt more internet-based services. And all of these things, especially the digitalization of critical services, have resulted in a very different landscape across the region that has both created a new wave of opportunities for entrepreneurs, for communities, for the economy, but it has also exposed new and long-standing gaps in our critical underlying internet infrastructure. So we're seeing more economic activity dependent on internet-based networks, and that's a good thing. We are seeing greater social and community empowerment dependent on internet-related networks, and that's also a good thing. There's more. There are more pathways for national competitiveness, economic diversification based on a connected economy, and that too is quite good. But the gaps that have been apparent inside of this acceleration to digital services and digital service adoption have put a spotlight on matters that are of what I consider, and certainly I believe my colleagues around this panel also, to be of critical Caribbean importance. The need for more investment in digital infrastructure, the domestication of critical components of the internet within our Caribbean borders and boundaries, the greater investment in indigenous, local technical skill and talent, also fundamental. And I can add to that, at a very basic level, digital literacy for those who have been forced to come online and make use of and make sense of this new digital domain. Also, we're seeing that as one of the critical areas of importance. The need for enabling policy to facilitate not just the acceleration of more services online, but to protect companies, to protect consumers, and to safeguard national interests has been another critical point of observation for the RIRs, for the regional internet registries. National dialogue has not widened to the point where most who have been impacted by the move to online services understand all of the risks and opportunities and dangers and safeguards that need to be put in place, and that needs to also be amplified and accelerated. And lastly, related to it all, participation in regional and global forums that shape how we use the internet. And that is something that I know, working with my colleagues here on this panel, we have been championing for some time now, the need for greater Caribbean participation in fora that shape, that define, and that determine how the internet applies itself to national life and national economies, both from an economic standpoint, but also, very importantly, from a social development and protection standpoint. And I think that's where we are now. And I want to just identify these points and leave it to the team to continue the discussion. Our increasing digital dependence requires that we pay greater attention to these issues of human resource development, of local internet infrastructure, enabling local network autonomy. The more dependent we are on these systems, the more vulnerable we are if they were for any reason disrupted or taken offline. The need to strengthen our local network resilience, and of course, the need to secure these assets. If I had to sum it up, I would say this: the local internet has finally arrived in the Caribbean. We're seeing more local services based on local networks transacting in local economies, and that is always a very good thing. But once that begins to happen, we also have to now pay greater attention to securing our internet interests, which are effectively now one and the same with our national economic and social interests.
Things in terms of local internet finally arriving and how dependent we have become and how we start to do business and transact and communicate more and more on the internet and relying on the internet for that capabilities. I invite you now to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Lisel, and also thank you to CANTO, not only for allowing us to share our thoughts on this important topic, the significant trends and changes in year 2 of the pandemic, but more importantly for coming up with this fantastic new platform, which brings us pretty close to what we normally experience at a CANTO conference face-to-face. So what we have been seeing with COVID-19, and this is a common theme, is that more companies are relying on the internet for their employees to work remotely. More students and teachers are relying on the internet to further their educational goals. Medical practitioners are providing more services remotely, and much of our social activity has moved online. In short, we need a secure, stable, and reliable internet even more now than we ever did before. And I'm not talking just about the bandwidth, but more importantly, the core internet infrastructure. Now, the internet is a very complex place. And as a result, there are several organizations who work together, some of which are represented on this panel, to keep the internet going. But ICANN's role relates to the names and numbers. Now, every device that's connected to the internet must have one of these numbers. We call them IP addresses, and Kevon spoke about these previously. And ICANN distributes these globally through regional internet registries like ARIN and LACNIC. Also, we hear about domain names, which are used in every single email address and also used to identify websites that you go to. And there is a system that translates these domain names into the IP addresses so the computers can talk to each other. That's called the domain name system. And then finally, every time you go to a website and you search for a particular, you go to a browser and search for a particular website, there's something called a root server which finds the location of the computer that you're looking for. And these are the core areas where ICANN is involved. And we have to make sure that all of these elements, along with our partners, work very well, particularly in a situation where we had a pandemic for almost 2 years now. And our Office of the Chief Technical Officer conducted an analysis of the effects of COVID-19 related lockdowns on what we refer to as these root servers. And this is what we found. We looked at searches that took place on different types of internet queries. One particular type of query that we looked at were queries for non-existent domain names. Now, what are non-existent domain names? These are domain names like .lan, .corp, .local, and .internal, which are typically used inside organizations when an individual is working from their office. But these domain names are typically not used when an individual works remotely. And as expected, we saw generally some increases in all of these areas. And you've already heard from Kevon and Bevil that there was an increase in demand for services. So I'm sad to tell you that the real news is no news. The internet did not break with all of this additional usage and additional requests for services. So I think that is pretty good news, because what it tells us is that the DNS architecture, the domain name system architecture, is well suited to scale during remote work and increase usage at home. We've heard a little bit also during COVID about domain abuse, and ICANN has this project called DNS Ticker, the Domain Name Security Threat Information Collection and Reporting. And essentially, ICANN was looking at requests that we were getting about what's happening as a result of COVID-19. Are hackers using more COVID-19 domain names to perpetrate attacks? Is this causing problems on the internet? And what I can say is that this has been working very well. ICANN has been using a fact-based approach to actually collecting this data and then passing it on to what we refer to as the registries and registrars, the companies on the internet that manage domain names at the top level, and ensuring that they're able to review and take appropriate action as and when necessary. And ICANN is happy to continue sharing all of this information with all of the relevant parties. So again, it is a situation where the attacks are taking place, not necessarily at a higher level than we saw before COVID, but at a level where we still need to be vigilant and collaborate in order to ensure that as a multi-stakeholder grouping globally, we keep the internet a secure, stable, and a reliable place for us to do business and interact socially. So I will stop at this point and hand it back over to Lisel, and surely we can continue the discussion.
The internet did not break. Shannon, I invite you now to give your contribution.
Yes, thank you very much, Michelle, and also thanks very much to Canto for inviting us. It's always a pleasure, honor to be here and to give a contribution. I think if it was not for the internet, then we would not be here to execute this program the way that we are doing it right now. So that is why it's very important for us to look, if you would like to focus a bit on the state of the internet during the pandemic, it's very important for us to look at the holistic, to take a holistic view of all the players within what we call the internet ecosystem. And then based on that, we can get an idea what has happened with the internet during the pandemic. And I would like to focus on a few indicators that can help us in that regard. For example, if we look at the overall traffic of the internet, we could say that it has grown somewhere between 20 to even 200%. If we look in the Caribbean, for example, telecommunications operators and IXPs have reported an increase of, let's say, approximately 40% traffic increase. But we have some figures, we have some global figures where we even have seen or have noticed, let's say, traffic increased even beyond 200%. We have also seen, for example, some changes in the application use. For example, right now we are using a video conference application. Previously, we haven't been using these applications so much, but we were forced due to COVID to move in this particular direction. And also here we have seen traffic increased beyond 200%. We have also seen, for example, some behavioral changes within campus, universities, for example, whereby what we call the outgoing traffic has increased to above more than 250%, but we have also seen some decrease in traffic, even more than 1,000% with respect to how do you call it? Incoming traffic at the universities, given that people are at home and universities are almost closed. With respect to the outgoing traffic, we have seen the increase because people still have to access, let's say, universities' resources. And we have also seen, for example, somewhere between 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning, people are much more active nowadays on the internet. So we have seen globally also some traffic increase in that regard. We have also seen, for example, with the mobile network operators, a traffic decreased more than 50%, and that's due to especially roaming, given that people are not traveling, tourists are not going to any country or doing any particular business. So we have seen that the mobile traffic has declined because people are locked down at home and they're just using, for example, their Wi-Fi at home. We have seen, for example, at interconnections, these have increased significantly, sometimes even more than 1,000%, given that all these networks could be interconnected, sharing traffic between one to the other. Also, we have seen, for example, with cloud platforms, we haven't seen, let's say, persistent congestions were not observed, but still, especially in areas where you have underserved areas or rural areas, it has been a challenge, for example, for those persons living in those areas to get access to the cloud, given that most of the times those connectivity are not the best. And the last mile, the last mile network, that is the centerpiece of the network, where you can get the most complaints from customers because they are connected to the last mile. And here we have also some very interesting data. We have some data from RIPE NCC, that's the regional internet registry in Europe, for Europe and also for Middle East. Normally, they do have a so-called Atlas probes where they measure, let's say, the internet traffic. And normally, they have been observing, let's say, 10% traffic congestion in the last mile. So that's normal. With the lockdown during COVID, we have seen even this approximately around 60% congestion within the last mile network. And when we look, for example, at the user behavior, also here we have seen some changes, for example, especially given that most people are using video conferencing services. We have seen traffic increase somewhere between 30 to 37%, and in some particular markets, even beyond 100%. What we have also seen is that 9 in 10 users, internet users, are increasing, for example, their internet activities. So they're trying to develop new businesses on the internet. And 6 in 10 internet users were quite satisfied with their fixed broadband service. And within the mobile services, we have seen that people are much more happy, for example, with their mobile services operators, because as I did mention, given that less capacity is being used within the mobile industry, there is still capacity to be used elsewhere. And also we have seen smartphone applications usage. Nowadays, people are much more tracking COVID-19 information, remote working, e-learning, wellness, education, remote health, consultation, and so on and so on. And of course, we have seen a decrease in travel and booking applications because people are locked down, they're not traveling that as much. So these are basically what we have seen with respect to what has happened during and still is going on with respect to COVID. I think it's very important for us to notice that we are talking about the internet, but still 50% of the globe is not connected to the internet. So we need to find ways and to put all our efforts in order for us to get that other half of the world connected to the internet. Because the digital divide is the only thing it's becoming bigger and bigger, because we have a lot of people that are not connected on the internet. If we look in our own region here in the Caribbean, if you look at the internet penetration, we do have countries that has, for example, 25% internet penetration, some others around 80 or 90. So we are seeing big disparities in the Caribbean as well. We need not to forget, for example, people living in rural or underserved areas. It's a challenge for them. How do they get connected to the internet? So these are the things that we need to focus on as well, while focusing to make sure that the internet continues to run, but also we need to get to develop some measures in order for others to get connected as well.
I think we may be losing you. Are you still with us, Shinan?
Yes, that's it from my end. Thank you.
I think we may have lost Shinan there. We will try to get him back, but gentlemen, definitely excellent foundation for us to start this discussion. We do have several questions coming in, so we will just answer as many as possible for the team in gives the signal to wrap us up. So, first question: how can the Caribbean as a region achieve some of these suggestions, and where would we start?
Okay, great. So on that note, I wanted to revisit a point that Bevil had mentioned, and he spoke about the Caribbean participating in the spaces where decisions are made that will actually give shape to what we want to see as a Caribbean internet experience and actually domesticate that experience. On the one hand, before I get to that, this is a prime opportunity for us to be looking at producing local content. Seeing that we are in this uptake of consuming content, the production of local content would really go hand in hand as we have all of these various various remote experiences happening in the name of maintaining productivity. And I'm very pleased to see within very recent times, at least here in Trinidad and Tobago, that there are actually media houses that have been calling on creatives to come and produce this local content. So that's a very good sign in terms of what is the Caribbean internet experience. On the other hand, the four of us here on this panel, you could probably call us the dynamic quartet, because outside of Canto, you'll probably see the four of us working actively on a number of initiatives. In terms of, in just general terms, we work closely on what are public education campaigns. And with these public education campaigns, what you'll find is that we are able to explain in very basic terms some of the substantive issues that are happening across the internet ecosystem. And we somewhat clarify what are the paths that you need to take to be able to make an impact on these substantive issues. So us conducting that public campaign is one layer. The other layer is that at each of our organizations, and particularly before the pandemic, we would hear the term fellowships and ambassadorships, which will allow people to have the opportunity to experience up close what these policy development processes are like at our respective organizations. But I mentioned the pandemic, and whereas we often think of the pandemic as a series of disadvantages, one advantage is that a lot of the policy making and policy shaping activities are now online. And with that online factor, it gives a lot of us an opportunity to be in places that we may not have been able to before because of the lack of funding or time. So there is a huge potential for us as a Caribbean to begin to follow closely what are some of these decisions with respect to IP numbers or domain names or digital policy in general, and actually have a clear impact on that, so that we can have, as I was putting it earlier, the domesticated and a true Caribbean internet experience. So I'll stop there and give someone else a chance to react to that question.
Sure. Anybody else would like to jump in on that?
Sure, Lisol. Maybe I can just make a quick comment. Kevon is spot on, particularly as it relates to policy. We as stakeholders in the Caribbean, whether we be in government, in business, in the technical community, we have the opportunity to shape the kind of internet that we would like to see. In ICANN, I've told you what we focus on, the names and the numbers from a global perspective, but it is the stakeholders, the individual businesses, the individual end users who really need to come forward and participate in processes at ICANN, participate in processes at LACNIC, participate in processes at ARIN, because this is where the decisions are made. And just to piggyback quickly on the comment of investment that Bevil made, with regard to root servers, these computers that we use every time we go into a browser, every time we go into an application, root servers can be established in every country, and that adds a level of resilience to the internet. So one of the things that we can do as a Caribbean is go into projects where we get these root servers established in our respective territories. And ICANN and the other organizations can help our end users with that. I'll pass it on from here.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and just continue building on that. The question was very open. And so the issues that we have been discussing are actually multifaceted. Both Albert and Kevon spoke to the very real and very necessary policy dimension of what it takes to address some of the issues. But there is another dimension that we're all working very, very much closely together on, and that is ensuring that there is a degree or greater degree of Caribbean coordination as it relates to building out the type of environment, the type of ecosystem, the type of layers that are required. And what that has done, what it has involved is, or entailed, it has required us to work very closely with existing national governments, beyond policy in terms of capacity building, and also work with the private sector in terms of actual training for the actual frontline workers on the digital sphere to ensure that we have the requisite levels of technical skill as it relates to network deployment, network design, and so on. This has meant organizations like the Caribbean Network Operators Group, CARIBNOG, the Caribbean Peering and Internet Forum, CARPIF, are very important components inside of how we tackle or we very tangibly address building Caribbean capacity. But it goes beyond that, because we also have very close relationships with organizations such as the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, the CTU, and with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, to ensure that when we speak about technology or technical infrastructure, we're not simply talking to the engineers and the technical personnel, but we're also talking to the end users at a particular level, those who have to make decisions about how they bring technical solutions into their organizations, how they secure those solutions, how they safeguard the kinds of resources that are necessary. So it's a total or holistic approach, one that requires all of the organizations to work with a level of collaboration, coordination like never before. But we're very committed to doing exactly that.
Of time, and I'm actually going to cheat it a little bit and just push one more question to you guys, which I think is a pertinent question that we should answer, and that is, has the digital divide changed since the pandemic? What is the way forward to bridge the gap as you see it?
Shannon?
Yes, I think let me answer like this. We are facing two big problems in the Caribbean and also elsewhere. We do have, for example, we need to get more people connected to the internet. As I did mention, globally still 50% is not connected to the internet. And on the other hand, we are not just promoting for people to be connected to the internet, but we would like them to be connected to the internet on a very secure way. So we do have a few programs where we are focusing, for example, on cybersecurity, encryption, these kind of things. Nowadays, with the pandemic, hackers have been much more active because this is a new business for them as well to get to increase their revenues. So I think, as Bevil did mention, we need to find ways how we can collaborate. It's not a very easy answer. We need to find ways. Each one of us need to focus on what are the challenges that we are facing, particular problems that we are facing in our countries, and then we should come together and see how we can solve them. But generally speaking, we can say that we have a lot of problems with respect to access, more people connected to the internet, and also, for example, in rural areas where people don't have any access to internet connectivity, and also to be connected on a secure way.
All right, anybody else want to jump in there? I will ask you guys to give your closing comments at the same time.
Okay.
Yes, Kevon, I believe.
Hi, Lisa. Yes, I'll just piggyback on Shernan's comment. Yes, digital transformation cannot forget or cannot leave behind digital divide initiatives. And I think that had become very apparent. I know of one particular case of a place that is very close to the Caribbean, Panama, that it became very apparent with their e-education initiatives that there was a huge divide, meaning that Panama City, children in Panama City were able to continue easily with their studies, and outside of Panama City, and particularly as you go to rural areas, there was a huge drop-off, meaning that educators found that they were entering a sort of crisis in how they can maintain training and educating children, having them move from one year to the next. So with digital divide in mind, it's good to use the impetus of the pandemic and of remote working to roll out the initiatives, but getting back or getting connectivity to those end users, that is extremely important. Within the LACNIC region, we have distributed 188 million IPv4s to connect 400 million users. So there's a story behind that, in that IPs are shared, where ideally we can look at mapping one IP per user, or one IP or more than one IP per user, because a user has at least 3 devices. Now we have a question of 240 million users remaining to connect within Latin America and the Caribbean, and only 1 million IPv4s remaining. So it gives us a good opportunity to deploy things like IPv6 to continue connecting the unconnected, and to take advantage of all of these transformation initiatives are happening, to continue with those digital divide initiatives that are critical to ensure that they connect the productivity and the continuity that we are hoping for, that actually takes place.
Perfect. Thank you, Bevil. Your closing comments. Muted again, Bevil.
I think it's clear in the way that the conversation has proceeded that to build out this interconnected Caribbean, we need an interconnected approach. There are many issues to be addressed, from the very real connecting the unconnected, serving the underserved or unserved, to building out the kind of infrastructure that the region needs to support its growing digital economy and digital activity. For this to happen, our organizations, both in the private and public sector, need to work differently. We need to have an acknowledgement of our collective responsibility to ensure that the region, both at the national level and at the regional level, is adequately prepared, adequately resourced, and adequately secured to take maximum advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead of us. And for this, I want to continue to make a plug for more dialogue, more interaction, but also more research into the peculiar ways in which the Caribbean is using the internet and how that is shaping and transforming our societies.
Of last words on this panel.
Thank you, Lisel. Fortunately for us, we have an internet which seems to have been robust and reliable in the face of being tested by COVID. We as stakeholders in the Caribbean region have the opportunity to contribute to the shaping the kind of internet that we have. So I encourage our stakeholders, whether you be from government, business, technical community, education, find out about ICANN, find out about LACNIC, find out about ARIN, find out about ISOC, and see how you can participate and have your voice of your country, your region heard, putting forward your concerns and your interests. So we need to make our voices heard and continue to collaborate. Thank you.
Definitely, that's a great note for us to end on. Make our voices heard. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out to chat with us today. And